2023 is almost done and dusted, and so far the only thing that can be said is that it was definitely a year. Geopolitical tensions remain the worry of the day, with the Russia-Ukraine war continuing to drag on and the situation on the Gaza Strip reaching a blood-soaked flashpoint, where Twitter was rebranded and Elon Musk saw something that he paid 44 billion for become only worth 19 billion, where AI changed everything, but this just strengthened our collective resolve to defend our humanity. With all that being said, we have narrowed it down to what we think are the top 5 stories of the year. Some of the big stories that didn't make our list included Anwar's cabinet reshuffle that saw the return of a few familiar faces. This was also the trend in corporate Malaysia as well at a few key government agencies. Tan Sri Abdul Rashid Hussein, whose name is synonymous with the bank he founded, was appointed as the chairman of Lembaga Tabung Haji, taking over from Tan Sri Azman Mokhtar. Supermax Corp, whose family troubles became highly public this year, will see the founder's nephew become CEO. Petchem and TNB will also see new captains come the new year. Up north, the Penang Development Corp came under scrutiny following the controversial sale of a land in Batu Kawan to a private company, UMEC, with the eventual reveal that Sunway was a substantial shareholder. It was also not short on scandals, like with Revenue Group, where its founders and CEO got into a literal public brouhaha that ended with resignations and lawsuits, while Sersol saw its former CEO, Datuk Justin Lim Hua Tat, just not show up for work one day. But this was also the year that strides were made into renewable energy as the world's ESG agenda ramped up, and not a moment too soon as severe weather patterns continue to threaten lives and livelihoods, and Malaysia welcomed its first Academy Award winner. You can read more about these stories and a few others we couldn't fit into our year-end bumper issue at theedgemarkets.com, or you can subscribe to our CEO Morning Brief. When COVID-19 put the aviation industry through the ringer, most were expecting 2023 to be the start of the boom years. While revenge travel kept planes full for Malaysian players from airline to airport, all of them encountered some form of turbulence in 2023. And none came more public and more spectacular than the overnight collapse of My Airline. On October 12th, 10-month-old My Airline abruptly shuttered its doors in the middle of the night, informing the authorities just mere hours before and leaving 5,000 passengers stranded, 39 flights grounded, and most of their 900 staff in the dark. While there had always been rumblings that things were maybe not going well, which got even louder when inaugural CEO Rainer Teo resigned about a week before, citing health reasons, the Civil Aviation Authority of Malaysia had granted My Airline an extension to its air operator certificate mere days before it all went belly up. In the days that followed, there has been suspension of licenses, promises to refund the 22 million already advanced by customers, and lawsuits surrounding its founder, Dato' Alan Goh Huan Hua, whose other venture, iServe Mall, is already under investigation for alleged money laundering. Unsurprisingly, this increased the scrutiny on Malaysia's other newest airline, SKS Airways, which has come out several times to assure that its funding remains in place. It should be noted, however, that its CEO, Zulera Abu Bakar, formerly from Meranti, resigned just 5 days shy of the 3-month mark of her tenureship. The good news is that for the more established airlines, it was a much rosier picture. Mostly. Medium-haul low-cost airline AirAsia X finally managed to exit PN17 in the dying days of November and saw a complete financial turnaround for the 18 months ended 2022, posting a net profit of almost 33 billion and is on track for another profitable year. As is its sister company Capital A, which is expected to post its first full-year profit since the pandemic started, and sentiment remains strong, despite co-founder Tan Sri Tony Fernandez getting some blowback on social media after a slightly NSFW post. National carrier Malaysia Airlines under the Malaysia Aviation Group is on track to achieve its first full-year profit since its privatization in 2014, the turnaround coming 2 years after the completion of its restructuring exercise in February 2021. But breaking up, as they say, is hard to do, and this year MAG ended its 25-year partnership with longtime catering partner Brahms Food Service. The relationship, though, had always drawn criticism about quality and pricing, and MAG itself called the terms lopsided. But MAG found itself having to deal with the brunt of customer dissatisfaction when the deal was dissolved without a backup plan in place, which meant the suspension of in-flight hot meals and only scant offerings. However, MAG says that things are completely back to normal. Finally, it was also an eventful year for Malaysia Airports Holdings, as tourism came back with a vengeance, which was reflected in their improving financials. But after 3 years of pandemic slumber, cracks started to show. The most obvious for the entire world to see was when 114 passengers, bags and all, were forced to walk along the 1.5-kilometer track connecting KLIA's main building and its satellite after the aerotrain broke down mid-trip. It puts a gigantic blemish on MAHB as the country's welcome ambassador, and its attempts to remedy this have not gone down well. It awarded a 743 million contract to Pestec International and its partner Alstom at the end of 2021 to fix the aerotrains, only to terminate it in mid-August this year. As at time of this taping, there is still no update on the aerotrain project, forcing KLIA passengers to continue taking the cumbersome bus service. While questions remain as to why did MAHB not deal with this issue during the forced COVID-19 downtime, or why a project where the hard infrastructure has already been built would require so much funding, this will be the task for whoever is eventually appointed MAHB's new permanent MD and CEO after its last chief, Datuk Sri Iskandar Mizal Mahmud, clocked out at the end of October. Lembaga Tabung Angkatan Tentera or LTAT continued to make news in 2023 after the littoral combat ship saga was one of the big stories in 2022. As LTAT continued its restructuring quest, it resulted in a few notable corporate maneuvers that were met with varying degrees of success. The one that went off without issue was the privatization of its flagship Baustat Holdings, save for complaints that the offer price of 85.5 cents was on the low side at only 52% of the subsidiary's net asset per share of RM1.64. But it was the privatization of Baustat Plantations where things got sticky. It started out as one of the biggest plantation deals in the country, with the sale of 33% equity interest to Kuala Lumpur Kepong for RM1.15 billion. KLK and LTAT were to jointly privatize the unit at a split of 65-35. But the opportunity to save LTAT without using public money went up in smoke after certain politicians questioned the sale of assets by a Bumiputra company to a non-Bumiputra entity. After much hand-wringing, eventually the Armed Forces Fund Board ended up needing to fork out RM1.11 billion to privatize Baustat Plantations on its own. This meant Putrajaya had to step in, inject 300 million into LTAT and arrange a government guarantee for a 2 billion ringgit loan. So instead of restructuring its debts, LTAT ended up taking more borrowings. Meanwhile, another significant corporate maneuver is LTAT's sale of a 4.95% block in Affin Bank to the State Financial Secretary Sarawak. It's said to be looking to hive off a larger stake at a later date. But the most pressing issue for LTAT and Baustat at the moment is 60.45% owned Pharmanyaga, now classified as a PN17 issuer as a result of a staggering 552.3 million impairment brought on by unsold COVID-19 vaccines. Finally, don't forget about those ships. The order is now reduced to 5, and with the first is due to arrive in August 2026. LTAT CEO Dato' Ahmad Nazim Abdul Rahman has managed to steer the Armed Forces Fund in a positive direction, and the hope is that he will stay on to finish the job. But we have a new Minister of Defence now, Dato' Sri Muhammad Khalid Nordin, who may want his own man at the helm of LTAT. In many ways, 2023 was the year that Sime Darby was ready for its close-up. The conglomerate pulled off one of the biggest mergers in corporate Malaysia history when in August, when it announced that it was acquiring PNB's 61.2% stake in UMW Holdings for a total cash consideration of 3.57 billion ringgit. In one stroke, it created a behemoth, an industrial and motor group with presence in various Asia-Pacific countries. It also essentially hitched even more of Sime Darby's wagon to its automotive business, as it gives the group access to the country's largest car maker, Perusahaan Otomobil Kedua, better known as Perodua, balancing out its China exposure that drove the business for many years. Sime Darby Auto, which had curated itself an image of being associated with luxury marques, with the UMW buy, allowed it to round out its portfolio with more mass-market brands. And as of December 27th, the takeover has become unconditional as shareholding exceeded 50%. It was also not the end for Sime Darby in terms of big corporate deals. In November, after what seemed like months of speculation, Sime Darby finally sold off its healthcare JV, Ramsay Sime Darby Healthcare, to Columbia Asia Healthcare for 5.7 billion ringgit cash, a further exclamation mark on its aim to focus on its automotive and industrial machinery business. Ultimately, the mark of a good M&A is that it makes synergistic sense all around. UMW shareholders were given a good exit price, and PNB, a major shareholder in both UMW and Sime Darby, is now flush with cash that it can deploy elsewhere to seek better returns for its unit holders. But for Sime Darby and its CEO Datuk Jeffrey Salim Davidson, the hard work really begins. Not only does he have to deliver on everything the merger promised, but he also needs to work together with UMW's various partners, which include Perodua shareholders Daihatsu Motor and Mitsui & Co. Daihatsu, which by the way has suspended production in Japan after a safety test scandal, another potential headache for him to deal with. We had 6 state polls in August, and while the apparent status quo outcome was widely predicted, it wasn't quite the victory the current administration was aiming for. Amid concerns that the bad blood between PH and BN would affect vote transferability, the unity government held on to Selangor, Negeri Sembilan and Penang, while Perikatan Nasional or PN retained Kelantan, Kedah and Terengganu. Seen as the unity government's first test with voters, the split result meant that PM Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim still had 2/3 majority in Parliament. But it did show that the ruling bloc had failed to win crucial Malay votes. In Selangor, the opposition upped its share of seats from 5 in the previous election to 22. In Penang, it won 11 seats, up from just 1 previously, and in Negeri Sembilan, it went from 0 to 5. But as Professor Wong Chin Huat of think tank Jeffrey Chia Institute on Southeast Asia said, a referendum it was not. After all, we're talking just 6 states. According to Chia, referendum is an abused word in Malaysia when this is used to mean the whole of Malaysia and as a basis to change a government when only 45% of voters were involved. He said the outcome of the 6 state elections is a parameter of what is to come in GE16 when 3 corners collapse in 2 straight fights. Chia notes that the state polls show that PH could retain and even pool its votes for UMNO, but not the other way around. So the verdict is on UMNO, and if Anwar wants to bet on this for the next general election, Wong says it's likely PN would grow stronger. In the meantime, the unity government is doing its level best to ensure political stability, even perhaps at the expense of fairness. Anwar has denied he used the MP's allocations as bait to gain support from opposition lawmakers, but withholding those funds did influence some to back him. As a result of his political acumen, Malaysia now has a government that commands the confidence of 2/3 of the Dewan Rakyat, the first time since 2008. But nothing is ever set in stone. The next election will be for the Sabah State Assembly, which has to be called by December 8th, 2025. High-profile criminal cases continue to hog the spotlight this year. Here's a couple of the more notable ones. First up, former Prime Minister Datuk Seri Najib Razak remains in Kajang prison after he failed in his final bid to get his SRC international-linked conviction reviewed. The country's top court had ruled that there was no miscarriage of justice in its previous decision in 2022 and said Najib was the author of his own misfortune. He did, however, remain acquitted of an audit tampering charge related to 1MDB, as did former 1MDB head honcho Arukanda Kandasamy. This is after the prosecution missed the deadline to file petitions of appeal against the verdict pronounced by the High Court, which ruled that there was no prima facie case against the ex-PM. That leaves 2 more cases, one being the 1MDB Tanore trial. Najib is being hauled to court over 25 charges, including 4 counts of abuse of power involving almost 2.3 billion ringgit in 1MDB funds. Particularly vital in this case is the testimony of 1MDB's former legal counsel, Jasmine Liu, who after years on the run surrendered to the authorities in July. The trial continues on January 2nd. And finally, the 6.6 billion criminal breach of trust charges that Najib is facing, together with ex-Treasury Sec Gen Muhammad Irwan Seriga Abdullah. The hearing has been set for next June. Meanwhile, Deputy PM Datuk Sri Dr. Ahmad Zahid Amidi was granted a DNAA. That's a discharge not amounting to an acquittal after all 47 charges in his Yayasan Akabudi trial were dropped. Ahmad Zahid walked out the High Court a free man after the prosecution said further investigations were necessary. As for the appeal regarding his acquittal on 40 graft charges related to the foreign visa system contract, the hearing is set for March next year. Another notable court outcome, Muar MP Syed Saddiq Syed Abdul Rahman, who in 2018 became Malaysia's youngest minister ever, was found guilty of 4 corruption charges in November. We are talking 7 years jail, 2 strokes of the rotan, and a 10 million ringgit fine. The execution of his sentence has been put on hold pending appeal. Also making news is Tan Sri Muhyiddin Yassin. In August, the High Court dropped 4 bribery charges linked to Jana Wibawa against him, calling them vague and defective. The AG's Chambers is appealing the decision, and this will be heard in February 2024. The ex-PM still has 3 more graft charges for allegedly laundering 200 million ringgit. He is seeking to have them struck out.